Hi, everybody, and welcome. My name is Lauren Hurst. I'm the Managing Director of GreenLeaders DC. Welcome to the latest in our series of online workshops with the Association of Environmental Studies and Sciences. Today, we're talking about energy efficiency, and specifically, how do we finance energy efficiency projects? And with us today is an expert on this subject. Her name is Abigail Johnson. Abby, welcome, and tell us about energy efficiency financing. What is the current state of this space? And where do you see it going in the future?
Okay, thanks, Laura. I appreciate it very much. Welcome, everyone. I just want to briefly say that in terms of the energy efficiency industry, my background and current company actually is on the real estate side. Having been in that commercial real estate industry, we realized that there were certainly opportunities and gaps in what's being actually done in buildings to make them energy efficient. And so with that perspective, we started working 4 or 5 years ago in the green building and energy efficiency space, and have seen, as we'll go through, some of the opportunities, some of the developments, and some of the challenges that are still out there in terms of the market and how to grow it. So basically, what we want to talk about is what the market is. Why are there ways to make it grow more than it is currently? Why are there problems or issues with that, and how can we, through education and advisory services, close some of these knowledge gaps? And then basically give a framework as well for what the industry is. It's immense, it's growing, it's complex, it's pivoting is the term used often, very, very often. And so you kind of, how do I kind of figure out where to start and frame my knowledge around how to move in this industry? It's not easy. So we'll go over that, and basically just in that context, go over some of the major types of financing out there related to energy efficiency and renewable sectors. And financing is very important simply because without money, the projects aren't funded, they're not done. And so that has been proven to be a key element of this whole industry. So just a brief overview of things. These are some statistics that probably are not that uncommon to you all because they've been out there a while, but it's still, I think, are big numbers, and it's something that we should just keep in mind when we think about the opportunities in this marketplace. And that is that energy in buildings accounts for approximately 40% of total energy in the US. It costs over $400 billion a year. And it accounts for 45% and upwards of greenhouse gas emissions. And electricity in buildings is almost half of all electricity used in the country. So these are big numbers. It's a big industry. There's big opportunities, and it's been out there a while. It's certainly been going on for 20, 30 years. But the last 2 years, we've really seen a growth and an excitement around the industry that I think will bring it to a tipping point, so to speak, regarding that. And this is just a slide. We don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but I just want to point out just the fact there's been a lot of progress made. And this is from Energy Star. There's been a lot of homes rated. A lot of buildings are now tracking their energy use in Portfolio Manager, which is managed by Energy Star. 300 plus million products in 1 year were purchased with the Energy Star label. 30 billion of savings in homes alone, and commercial buildings are not too far behind. So basically, things are moving, and yet we do see that there are industries, particularly the small to medium-sized commercial and industrial market, that have not, for the most part, been retrofitted yet. And so this is one of the opportunities that we see going forward. And in that number, there's billions of dollars a year that can be exploited from this. This is just energy efficiency. If you add solar and wind, which add electrical distributed generation to the mix, the number even gets larger. So big opportunity, big numbers. It's something we all want to try to improve upon and work in, given where we are in our issues that we have in the environment. So to kind of frame it, there's many ways in which you want to do a retrofit. You have a retrofit, or you make changes to your equipment when you're at the end of your useful life of your equipment. It can happen as part of your capital budget that you have over 3, 5 plus years. And often, when big changes are made, or when you are buying a building, or when you're refinancing a building. So I put this slide up here, and the numbers are huge, as you can see, of the commercial real estate loans that are coming due 2015 through 2017, based on 10-year loans that originated in 2005 through 2007. It's a huge spike, and this just represents one type of commercial mortgage that was part of the securitization industry. So huge numbers, huge opportunities. And in this specific market, what's interesting about it is that these properties were aggressively underwritten, meaning that their values were pushed. And so now, 10 years later, they may not really be able to refinance in the way that they would like, get the loans they would like. And as a result, I think there's a valuable opportunity to use energy efficiency and renewable products to enhance value. So that's just kind of an idea of where we are, give you a frame of our industry. So let's talk a little bit about where we are and why we aren't farther along than we think we would be, given the fact there's been so much buzz and excitement and direction internationally and from the White House, etc. This is just a slide that I like to include because it shows from a building owner's perspective the complexity of what they're dealing with. And you know, as a building owner, they're bombarded by service providers, some of whom are independent, some of whom are not. They're bombarded with a multitude of platforms, technology platforms, ways to analyze their energy usage. They're in a certain area or multiple areas with different codes, building codes, energy codes that impact their property. There's multitudes of programs out there, many of which are applicable and many of which are not. And trying to sift through that is pretty complex. So there's a lot more than even on these slides, but it's to show you that it's something that it makes sense that, you know, to some degree there's a lack of funding and money out there, but there's also a lack of way of being able to figure out, you know, what's the next best step. So I kind of define these knowledge gaps or areas where we can improve on in 3 areas. One is amongst disciplines. I would say that this may be something that is been talked about a bit, but I still see it often, is the fact that if you are a technical individual, you're an energy engineer, you're an auditor, you're an OEM, you know, equipment manufacturer, and you're trying to sell your product to building owners, a lot of them are still providing information that is overly technical and basically does not provide the information that's going to make the decision maker, the CFO, the building owner, maybe the property manager say, yes, I want to do that solution. And the reason is because very recently I was provided with yet another presentation by this is a company that provides innovative improvements to existing air conditioning units that you find in hotels. And this is one of the 10 slides that they provided to me as an example of what they show potential clients. Now, I spent about 20 minutes kind of going through this and figuring out what they meant and trying to really understand the data, because a part of me, although I'm not a mechanical engineer, kind of loves this stuff, but I can guarantee you that this just, you know, the light switched off when building owners saw this. And so I want to point out that when you talk about this gap, this is what the engineers and manufacturers like to show often, and this is what the building owners want to see. And if you look at this slide, it's a lot of numbers, but basically in the left, under the unlevered and levered scenario, you see payback, IRR, NPV, you know, even the simple, you know, return on investment, all these financial metrics that will determine whether or not they want to go forward with the project. So this is great if you're talking to the facility manager, but it's not going to make the facility manager within a large organization be able to then get the building owner or CFO or the decision maker to do it. They need to have this as well. So that's just something to point out. I also would say that in addition, when I say financial and technical disconnect, often when you're dealing with energy efficiency projects, a lot of times these opportunities arise when there's a transaction about to occur. So the kind of center person or organization is the broker. It's a sales broker, it's a mortgage broker, or even if it's a lender directly, these folks are compensated on execution and on the deal going through. So anything that makes their deal have a hiccup is considered to be something that they don't want to consider. And I've had this, I've been in California, and you think, well, Northern California, there's, benchmarking and audit requirements, there's, state laws, and still it's like, what's this going to do to my deal? Is it going to slow it up? Is it going to make someone think twice? Don't want to see it. So that's just kind of an overview of some of the areas that need to be, that we see. And data, I think in the past, data has really not been that great. It hasn't been at the level which the real estate community is used to seeing. If you're trying to figure out what rents and expenses, and figure out how to basically figure out your net operating income for a building you're looking at purchasing or financing, you can find very detailed information from very reliable sources. Details on the kind of property type, is it an office, multi-tenant, Class A, B, C, is it in the Bay Area, is it in Walnut Creek, is it in, what's the occupancy, the vacancy trends, all that stuff is available. And I would say, this is what their mindset is of what they want to see in the energy sector, and that to date has not been really that disseminated in an organized way that's considered to be reliable and independent, because you have lots of these organizations that provide benchmarking information in addition to portfolio manager and the DOE, and it's kind of a black box. You're not sure where the data sets are from. So yeah, your building's doing horribly, but what's the data set, or is doing well? Maybe it's hard to know. And one of our partner companies out in the Bay Area said that they, on more than one occasion, have taken an Energy Star building that is rated 100, and they will find something like 10 to 15% additional savings. And that's a recently, rated or certified building. So, that's always going to happen, but there's been this kind of, question about reliability. And then finally, just quick, standards.
Abby, make sure to advance your slides as well, so we can see exactly what slide you're on.
Right, this is the slide I'm still on, right here.
Okay.
Yeah, I will. Anyway, I'll forward shortly to other slides. Basically, what I would say is that with standards, you basically want to be able to have the different groups in the industry be able to use similar informational protocols in order to have the end users, the building owners, the lenders, the appraisers be able to compare apples to apples. And so there's different organizations that are in the process of creating this. But to date, I would say that's something that has not really been that prevalent. So that leads to the fact that what can we do about all this? How do we make this industry more efficient, ramp up things so we get greater adoption? And so in terms of disciplines, I'll just briefly say, the obvious train bank employees to learn about energy efficiency. Get appraisers to have mandatory classes to learn about what energy efficiency is and how to value it. Create like a lead type workshop and early in the process where if whoever brings in the opportunity, say a contractor comes to a building owner and says, here's an opportunity to do a $1.5 million retrofit to your retail building, including new lights, HVAC, and some rooftop solar. And instead of the building owner saying, okay, great, or I don't know, who do I go to find money? And you say, let's get every party involved. We'll get either my internal or external owner's representative. We'll get the independent engineer. We'll figure out, let's get the lenders that we know who work in this field and on the call, and let's just have a kind of a brainstorming session on the best options here. And maybe I'm thinking a little bit idealistically, but I think it's something that over time can happen and does happen in the regular conventional marketplace. And so I think it's going to really help bridge this understanding of these things so that the engineer won't try to put in a slide that looks like this all the time, they'll try to put in, or at least understand that this is what they have to at least clarify to building owners. And then data, I just put up some of the new things coming out. Some of these sources have been out there a while. Certainly on energy.gov, you can find everything, pretty much all the programs out there. I would say that the labs are great. The national labs, such as Lawrence Berkeley Lab, National Renewable Energy Lab in Colorado, they have great informational sources that are completely independent and updated. There's also a new platform called Seed. It's basically an open source platform that allows you to enter in data, similar to Portfolio Manager, but it feeds in other data as well, such as that will allow you to have a more comprehensive view about the building, some age, number of stories, and lets you share the data within your portfolio and amongst other building owners. So a lot of the use for this open source platform will be by local governments, actually. And we see it being in the PACE financing marketplace as an opportunity for local governments to basically, for free, at least have a platform they can use to have the information fed into, instead of hiring third parties to charge you for something around a database that's you don't see. So anyway, there's lots of things that are coming out, and we think that this is the key to, as more data comes in, it's going to kind of solve this problem of reliability and questioning energy efficiency as being real. And then finally, just a few items I listed here about process. Basically, we need more standards, and I think that having ability to have checklists that have been independently certified. The Environmental Defense Fund has a group called the Investor Confidence Project, and basically over the last several years, through huge engagement with the DOE and private sector stakeholders, have created protocols and training programs that will allow, and checklists, so that everyone from different sectors can come and just use these documents, and that will pretty much say you've done what you need to do based on the kind of building you have. And it's been very well vetted, so we're looking forward to seeing this kind of product, this quality assurance checklist, and the people who are trained in it to provide a high level of information that we can compare and trust. And that then goes along with that kind of information on the engineering side, will then be able to be input into the appraisal addendums that are now being included at times, but not enough, into appraisals, which will basically allow appraisers who are extremely important in the process of getting funding for buildings in general, to be able to accurately value energy efficiency. So, and then just quickly, a snapshot of Portfolio Manager. Most everyone has probably heard of it, but it's something that, there'll be times where I feel like a lot of these data companies are trying to sell you on their platform, where really don't need to do that. You can just go directly to Portfolio Manager, unless that service is providing auxiliary services such as measurement and verification in a way that is really useful, or somehow able to monitor remotely, your equipment. Portfolio Manager is still a great tool. So, any questions today, or anything you want to ask about all that data load? Data dump I just did.
Yeah, one thing that's very interesting, I think, is the role of standards, and how far standardization of things like contracts and measures of energy efficiency, how prevalent are the standards at this point, and how widespread are they? Are there a lot of different standards in the industry at this point, or are people converging on what is really a set of widely accepted standards to make sure that building owners and engineers and all these different people that really have a common reference point when designing energy efficiency measures? How far along is that, would you say?
It's not very prevalent. So I will tell you that you get a level 2. You have an ASHRAE, which is the Association of Refrigeration, et cetera. And basically, the engineering side of the efficiency business for years, and they developed standards for audits like level 1, 2, and 3. And you do have commissioning organizations that have created documentation for how to do commissioning. And so in the public sector, there are specific sets of documents you have to follow to have the building successfully commissioned. In the private sector, it's definitely loosey-goosey, and I've seen level 2 audits that really vary, because the it wasn't at the ASTM level of standardization, and now that is coming out. And so with that being developed, I think that'll help say, okay, a level 2 audit really means this. It really has this degree of analysis behind it, because I've just seen audits that really vary in quality, and then it does beg the question, can I trust the information? And I think this investor, if you go into the investor confidence, if you just Google investor confidence project, what they're doing is, I think, really important to the industry, because it almost goes at a higher level of even just the audit and says, okay, if we want to, for the commercial building owners, which are the main folks that have not gotten on board, so to speak, the small to medium size primarily, have not retrofitted their properties, how can we make it so that they can know that the individual coming to me, or the information I have, is going to help me with my goals? And that is how this entire project is geared. And they just came out with it, so I haven't had a chance to review the latest one, but it's done in conjunction with the lab. So that is going to be huge. I think that's, I mean, I say really hopefully, but that should make a big difference in that, because it's taking that account of an umbrella approach to all the different segments of the industry. So.
Yeah, thank you, Abigail, for your presentation so far. I worked with the Lexington and Fayetteville County government in the Division of Planning. So we got involved with zoning, subdivision developments, got involved with a thing called new urbanism.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I'm looking at as far as what you're saying. What are the carrot versus the stick approaches? I know the lead efficiency is one approach, but I'm trying to bring this together, obviously, to promote through the marketplace via the enforcement of the local, state, federal side, if you will. Do you have any resources online? Like I did see where you mentioned the portfolio manager. I'm just kind of interested about places where you can go in, input information, and get feedback, data. I appreciate some resources, Abigail, in that area.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a database that was developed by the Department of Energy, which was recently updated. I can send you the link to that. It's called the DOE Building Performance Database, and it's basically the way of analyzing buildings by type. And I have to say, it's pretty new, and I was going through it the other day, and it takes a little while to figure it out. But you can basically put in what kind of building you want, and whether, where it's located, and figure out, some of its energy data, UI. If you want something that's specific, are you looking more from a perspective of encouraging energy efficiency through code incentives? Is that more what your goal is?
I would say yes. It would probably start fundamentally with building and inspection. And then I've heard you mention we can get involved with zone changes to actually the land use applications. Density would be important, transportation, those type of things. I also get involved with carbon management as far as global warming, and I want to implement that as far as how much it costs to do certain things with respect to energy and waste. And I just want to mention that as well.
Yeah, I would say that, there are a lot of firms that specialize actually in determining greenhouse gas emissions and how they can be valued from a financial standpoint, not just to save the earth. I would recommend, it's not my area of expertise specifically, but the labs, so the Lawrence Berkeley Lab, and if you just go to eere.gov, and it's basically the part of the DOE, and it has all the labs, and the labs have very specific information on that kind of issue. So they'll have that's where you're going to get the data for specific things. So for me, I'm looking more at information on return on investment for certain kinds of equipment. So I'm looking for that kind of thing. You can find, I'm part of a solar working group, and everything is online, and all the documents are created for power purchase agreements. It's all available on the DOE. So I would start there. And look to counties like Arlington, which is near where Lauren is. Arlington County has done great things in terms of encouraging private sector to be more green through density increases and other initiatives. So they're great. I mean, they're kind of local to us, but they're a great county in terms of having to deal with, trying to encourage successfully, but successfully, they've done very well. Building owners have used these density increases. Other incentives or carrots that they've put out, they have used, and it's worked out. It's like 8 or 9 years now it's been in effect. So if you may be familiar with Arlington County, Virginia, but that's a great county to look at for their.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I have another question, and this goes more towards the education of the public in terms of the energy efficiency measures and how things are going through.
Want to hear static? Yeah.
Okay. How about that? Is that better?
A little bit. Do you hear it? Is it just me or?
No, I can hear it too. It's kind of like an echo feedback a little bit.
Okay. Sometimes it'll clear itself
Perfect.
up.
There you go.
There you go. Okay. Just got to wait for a second. And what I'm really interested in is the role of the real estate brokerages. Because these are the guys, and these are the people who are interfacing with the public. They're out, selling both residential and commercial real estate. What would you say is the level of awareness of energy efficiency measures and these types of financing mechanisms in the brokerage space, as opposed to energy engineers and renewable energy technology providers, because they are the one, they're sort of the interface, because I think if you take a lot of the information that you just presented and you give it to the public, they're going to say, we don't understand this. But the brokers are the ones who are answering the questions about money, about all those types of things that go into the long-term operating costs of a building. How much are they familiar with this space, and what do you think could be improved about that?
Well, I mean, two cases of So number one, when I mentioned that brokers feel like if the deal is going to complicate their life, their deal, they don't even want to think about it. So they don't see it as a selling aspect, they see it as something as a hindrance potentially. Like in a way, when you do particularly in financing, you have all these reports you have to do. You have to do an appraisal, you have to do property condition report often, you have to do an environmental study, and so sometimes the energy audit gets lumped into that things I have to do mentality part of it, versus this is something that's almost can be, in certain circumstances, be considered supplemental financing, increasing the value of your building. So it's changing it from the due diligence perspective of what this is to being an opportunity for them to actually make more sales. I would say that on the residential side, and I'm not an expert in residential, but I think it's more prevalent because people like the idea of being green as an individual, as a person, and go, oh, this is what I have a low flow toilet, or it's great, I can do solar hot water. I mean, I think it's a different, you're going to have the house a long time. So a real estate residential broker has more opportunity to sell some of these features, and that's going to vary a lot by where you are. So if you're in Northern California or Boston or New York or DC, Chicago, that's going to be a lot more prevalent than other areas. So looking around for a house in Eastern Virginia here, just even getting a contractor who try to get the rebate back on a high efficiency hot water heater was a very big struggle, and we didn't get it because he didn't know. So there's, it's coming, but I think it's starting kind of emanating, honestly, in areas where you have, I think I have a slide on that. These are the cities and counties that have benchmarking requirements. Some of these also have other kinds of requirements as well, but just in terms of if you are in these cities or these states, you have certain requirements to say what energy your building is using. And some of these are all commercial, some are residential too, but that creates a mindset, I think, I didn't show you the slide, hold on, let me do that. It creates a mindset that you need to understand that because it's law. So, there you go. So, it's important to think, well, if I live in Atlanta and I want to sell a house or commercial building, I need to disclose that you have to, we have to know what your energy bills are. That's a requirement. And then, wow, if your building is, if a scale of 0 to 100 in Energy Star, if you're a 20, you're not going to look so good. So that, I think LEED is important as well. But I think what's happening with LEED is that buildings are being, Class A buildings are becoming LEED certified anyway. And the middle market is like, it's too expensive, so they're building to LEED standards. But that's different. That's not a law. These are laws. So I think that's going to help. And I think education, if I'm going out the Bay Area next week for work and I'm I want to meet up with an old appraiser buddy of mine. A national appraisal company, a large appraisal company. He does big projects. And I said, why don't we also come and just talk to a few of your appraisers about these benchmarking laws and energy efficiency. He's like, we don't really deal with that. I'm like, what do you mean you don't deal with that? You're in San Francisco. Of course you deal with that. You have a benchmarking law. You have an audit, requirement. You have seismic requirements that are tied into these laws. I mean, you've got all of these things that are saying, yes, you need to understand this, and yet he's like, So there's a lot of work to be done. Yeah. And it's got to be fast. They don't do this. This would have been way past the interest level of a broker. It's got to be, my slides to my mortgage banking buddies is like 5 slides in about 6 minutes. Yeah.
Right. I think there's also a very big aspect of marketing and public relations that also goes with this. Everybody knows, in the recent news cycle that Tesla just released their Powerwall, and there was a lot of commentary in the press that, this is just another green toy for rich people, so that they can put one on their wall and say, look at me, I've got a Tesla Powerwall, okay, and it's powered by solar. Now, in some cases that may be true, but I also think that this is, also a very big step forward, because what they're doing is they're essentially showing us a model of how things can work in the future, okay, and actually putting a tangible result of the idea of being completely off-grid and being self-sufficient with your energy. So I think that in the markets, when you're talking about energy efficiency and how we're even using energy, when we're talking about smart grid and microgrids and distributed energy infrastructures, that opens up an entirely new set of considerations as to how we're going to invest in our energy infrastructure in the future, and how does energy efficiency play into that. Because I think a lot of what you're talking about now is they take existing buildings and they try to make them energy efficient, but what if the entire type of energy system changes? How are those standards going to change, and how important are they going to become in the future as we move into more of a distributed type of solar-driven, renewable energy-driven energy infrastructure? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'll tell you that in the PACE financing, which we'll talk about briefly later, but in this kind of financing mechanism, what they try to do to encourage, it started out as, what is an innovative way to try to put energy efficiency measures in a building that are deep retrofits, so they're more than just the low, no cost, which a lot of which have been done. Everyone switched out T12s, made some minor changes to lighting and maybe some variable frequency drives, whatever. Some things have been done, right? The low flow toilets have been done. So how do you get folks to go, okay, my boiler is going to be, I need to replace it, and I can replace it with the one that really costs about the same, but only, I'm going from an 80% efficiency to an 85. But if I go to 94% efficiency boiler, the impact on your savings is great, but it's going to take 10 years to pay off, and I'm planning to sell my building in year 2 or 3. So this mechanism, which I don't want to jump ahead, but the point is that it's made to solve that issue. But as a result, they also kind of did the whole kitchen sink thing. So what they did is they said, we're going to put in energy efficiency, renewable energy, water, and also, wait a minute, if your roof, even though it's not equipment, if your roof is more efficient, if you put a white roof on from a black roof, or you add insulation, that counts. You can put that in the financing. If you're in Florida and I want to put in hurricane shutters or bracing for hurricanes, that gets put in. If you're in California, seismic gets put in. It includes. So then all of a sudden people are associating with, and the same in New Jersey, they're considering doing this as well, resiliency measures that you need or have to have because of insurance requirements or because you don't want your building to fall down, and that is tied to other energy improvements. It'll go along with it. So, if I can get money to pay for seismic or for earthquake retrofitting, but I also get to put on a new roof and HVAC, and I pay for it over 20 years, that's great. Let's just dump it all in. So I think that's going to be important. Just as you said, it's more than just a bubble,
Right, exactly. Things can get complicated very quickly.
Yeah, yeah.
I wanted to ask you, Abigail, also something about smart devices by electrical companies. I know there's a lot of apprehension as far as technology and certain types of devices, and some people don't trust smart devices. And there are people overseeing that can actually basically monitor their electrical services based upon power distribution, located all the way to those individual power devices. What do you see in this area as far as smart devices in energy usage with power companies, etc.? What, for example, in the real estate market and LEED, do you have any? Because that can be somewhat controversial, especially in Kentucky. A lot of people don't trust those types of devices. Okay, it takes away their freedom to use things. So I just want to kind of share that as well.
I think that certainly is more the residential side, like the Nest thermostat and all the smart apps, and you can do that. You need to have the smart meter. And I was in California a few years ago, which is an area where, you talk about this stuff all the time, but there were lawsuits against the PG&E putting in these smart meters and, the magnetic waves and all that, and there's lots of studies, of course, that show it's not doing anything to you. But, yeah, it's going to take time, and I think on a residential level, because I feel like in the commercial level it's already being done. Like demand response, people outsource that. Not everyone, but everyone knows if you have a building that's smart, you're going to have a better way of monitoring your energy usage. So if you're in a utility where they really ding you for at peak demand moments, right, then you want to have these devices. There's a new company came out with called, look at that, it's called Ohm. I actually sent them to see if they did commercial, because I really don't do residential, but it might be something to look at. Let me see if I can find it. It's called Ohm Connect, OHM Connect, and basically it's a way for individuals through their smartphone to decide, to be empowered to figure out when they want to lower their utility bills. So instead of having a third party do it, they can do it. And so it just came out. I don't know much about it, except that I thought that's great. It's a cheaper way. I was thinking for smaller commercial buildings of trying to be able to reduce your electricity usage in key times without having to pay a third-party company a lot of money. But there is a lot of fear out there. I just think it's going to take time as well. And if you start seeing, oh wow, I just saved. If this app shows you I just saved $20 this month, don't you? I think that's going to help. I saved this money. This is great. I'll do that again. Who cares about that smart meter radiation if I can save money? But I don't know if it's going to be for older people. I don't see the older folks being into that as much. It's all those whippersnappers in their 20s, the millennials. That's right. The Xers like us are not, maybe we won't. We're kind of we're between, I don't know, maybe you're a millennial, sorry, I don't mean to say, but Lauren and I are Xers, so, that we're aware of it, but it's not, we grew up with something different entirely, so.
That's right. Things have definitely changed in the times when, when the Xers were coming up and now. So, yeah, I don't know any millennials who don't, figure that everything can be done from a smartphone. By the way, everybody, if you want to go ahead and check out that website, it's OHM Connect. And okay. I can screen share it for you really quick so you can take a look at it.
Well, thanks for doing that, because I was just trying to figure out how to do that.
just so you can get an idea of what it looks like. There it is, right there. And you can sign up. Mm-hmm. As simple as flipping a light switch. That's how everything should be, right? And there's a video for you to give a better idea of what that's like.
Video.
Very nice, Lauren.
There you go. Okay, so we're back. I don't have any more questions at this point. Abby, do you have any final comments or thoughts on people who, let's take a look at energy efficiency finance and where it's going in the future. Where do you see some of the major trends taking us? You say that this is a very big growing field, and I would think that as the standards get more entrenched in the marketplace, we can see a lot of scaling of energy efficiency, particularly driven by regulation in terms of how we're sourcing and using our energy. How do you see that developing?
Okay, so let me go back to my presentation, just show a few slides that will kind of frame that, and then I'll explain. What you just touched on is something that this conference I was at last week. This was discussed in the context of solar, but it's completely applicable to energy efficiency. So, just really quickly, going back to the part of the webinar was talk about, what you need to know about energy efficiency financing. And before you can do that, you have to understand generally how the retrofit process works. where to find the information, how to analyze your building, and then figure out what you want to do. So maybe it seems obvious, but if you want to be able to navigate your world in this world, you have to be able to know that first you get screen your property, you figure out, is this a good candidate, you know, or not. This is a workflow I did for a project we worked on in Florida. So, you know, this is for a specific financing program. Basically, you know, are you eligible or not, for whatever the criteria are. Do a little back of the envelope, you know, analysis of, okay, I go in the building, I can see, or I've talked to the property owner, he's told me the following things. Does it seem like a good idea? Like there's enough value for doing some level of retrofit? Yes or no, etc. So there's a process you need to go through, and if Gary's interested, I can send him this very detailed process, but basically talks about how you make decisions, how you underwrite, and then the importance of monitoring during construction and afterwards in terms of because when you're doing a retrofit and you're monetizing the energy improvements. So, you know, a lot of companies offer the ability, which we'll discuss in a second, of taking these savings and saying, we're going to pay you for the savings we're going to create, but we're going to control your building. And so when you do that, you basically are giving them the key, so to speak, to your energy consumption or your equipment, and you want to make sure that you're getting what you paid for, so to speak. So that's why understanding everything from when I talk to an engineer, you know, what are they providing me? What do I need to have? When I'm analyzing it, what kind of, you know, do I want to do a few things, many things? How do I find the funding? Who am I going to? And what does that actual term sheet look like? And then, you know, making sure you have good construction administration and making sure that after it's installed, someone's watching it, you know. So just, and I'll go very quickly through this, but there's three major areas I consider for financing. And financing, again, is a focus of this simply because, really, without financing, very little happens except for the very low, no-cost measures. And this has certainly been the biggest opportunity and continues to be the biggest opportunity to get into the small, medium-sized market. So at this conference I was at last week, interesting, it was solar. There were a group of us, kind of a little posse of energy efficiency people who work in this financing mechanism group called PACE financing, and we were there too because we have bonds and solar is trying to create bonds, and so many conversations were about, we've done solar on the Walmarts, we've done solar for the mush market, the institutional markets, the hospitals, the universities, we've done it on the federal buildings. Where are most of the buildings still? They're the small, medium-sized buildings, they're multi-tenants, they're smaller building owners, they don't have portfolios of 150 malls or shopping centers or office buildings, and no one's touching it. So I'm like, and for me, as I work with the energy, we're like, yeah, duh, we already knew that. But for the solar, I think it's something that they haven't been really, they've done so much work on the very large scale stuff, they just kind of realized we need to get to these smaller markets, and to do that, we need to be standardized. We have to be able to churn these suckers out more quickly, because otherwise you spend way too much time trying to underwrite a small deal, and no one wants to do that. So, but basically, you have, I'll just move on to, you can look at the slides later, lots of considerations for financing, but there's few groups, you have, I do it internally, so I run a building and I have a CapEx budget, capital expenditures, and I can do this amount per year. That can be limitations. They can also mean that, you ask, I've talked to facility managers, I've talked to my CFO, we don't have money for that. It's like, yes, but this equipment is really energy efficient. Look at, maybe they're really pretty sophisticated, and they show them a spreadsheet that says, look, it's going to pay back in 1 year. And it's like, we don't have the money. Very frustrating. So I put in there green revolving loan funds because there's some groups out there, one particular group, hospitals, they, as an example, they will fund projects internally with their internal budget. And then the savings that are created from these projects are then rolled into a separate fund from their CapEx budget that helps fund future projects. So they obviously have to get the buy-in of management to say, we're accepting that you're actually lowering utility bills, but you can prove it. If you're monitoring it, you can say, look, we put in this new HVAC system, we put in these lights, it's saving this amount. And that amount that we're saving, we want to then monetize and put into a separate fund to give us some leeway to do more retrofits. So there's that, of course. It's and then there's traditional bank debt, but that has limitations in terms of loan to value and appraisers underwriting savings into their platform, because traditionally when you're doing energy efficiency, when you're traditionally underwriting operating expenses, you do it historically, not in the future. So I've seen a lot of pushback. It's changing about saying, well, I'm not going to assume there's going to be a 30% reduction in utilities day one, but that leads into Fannie Mae. The multifamily side, in an attempt to, from a kind of a governmental almost standpoint, push that for both affordable and market rate. They have a program right now only in New York City. We were involved a few years ago in the development of the technical side a bit. So I know that they would like to roll this out nationwide, but right now in the 5 boroughs, you can do a Fannie Mae loan, which are the most competitive out there in your apartment building, and you can get up to 50% of identified savings in the audit they will include in their underwriting. So if you said, I'm going to save $100,000 a year in electricity, they'll credit up to 50% of that, $50,000. Now, for those of us in the industry, we think, what? This should be 100% or 90%. 50 is really a low benchmark. But you know what? At this point, we're like, we'll take what we can get. I mean, this is better than nothing. I mean, this has never really been done formally. And then the Green Finance Plus program, that's something a little less aggressive, but for affordable housing. So there's some things out there, but really why? Because of this is being limiting, because there's not enough bandwidth in traditional right now. Other kinds of vehicles have popped up. They started in the public sector, public sector, large public buildings and state buildings, municipal buildings, and now these kind of vehicles are moving into the private sector. So these are a list of all the different kind of, it's called off-balance sheet primarily, but anything that basically allows you to, some of them may not be off-balance sheet in a year or two, if the FASB regulations change, but basically allow you a way to take energy, have it put in measures, not pay anything up front typically, and have those savings be shared usually with a separate company. And there's many different ways to structure it. But it allows the building owner to, over time, incur the value of the savings through reduced utility bills. And because of the way commercial real estate works and the fact you have lots of tenants that pay typically for their own electricity, it complicates it. But there's lots of different things going on trying to reduce that split incentive. So just really quickly, this is to kind of just show you visually, this is what it used to look like. Right, you had government incentives and some owner's equity when you're doing a retrofit, and this is all the new things that are coming out. So the off-balance sheet I was showing you, PACE financing, these can help basically instead of having to have additional owner equity or additional other kinds of debt, you can use these kind of vehicles to pay for retrofits. So, and this is just another visual of how this kind of works. For energy service agreement, but pretty much for a lot of these mechanisms, you basically have a utility bill. It's reduced. You have to pay the contractor who installed the equipment something for having installed the equipment that they paid for day one. So you pay them over a term, and you get a small amount of savings. And then as the savings go up, you basically, as time goes on, you'll eventually get all the value of the savings. So you'll pay that red, you'll pay for the equipment basically, and the equipment provider or the energy service provider gets paid by the savings. And then after the equipment's paid for, then you split it, and eventually the building owner gets all the value. So it's a way of the energy service contractor gets paid for the equipment. They get paid primarily. They get through the savings. They get a share of the energy savings that they can guarantee or not. So they'll say, okay, well, you don't believe me. I'm willing to say you're going to save 15 or 20%, but you're going to pay for that. So there's a fee to that. And then they usually get some kind of service agreement at the end. They maintain the equipment, they monitor the energy. So, there's lots of iterations of this type of financing. It's something that there are some ways of doing that in the private sector, so.
Yeah, what are some of is there any one of these models that you think is going to be most prevalent here in the future that people might be able to pay attention to?
PPAs are typically for solar, although MEETS is actually. So what happens is, if you have a multi-tenant building and you have, say, 15 tenants, and they all have separate meters for electricity and gas. Like, there's no common areas, or maybe very small common areas. So the building owner has pretty much no incentive to do any retrofits. Only in circumstances where the financing vehicle allows for some capital improvements to be included in that deal, like roofs, parking lot lights, but that's a big issue. So if these energy service contracts are typically with the building owner, so when you can figure out a way for these contracts to be viewed purely as a utility expense, many leases allow for that to be passed through to the tenant, and that is key. So there's a lot of battle going on. There's different kinds of energy service agreements that the provider will actually pay the utility on behalf of the building owner, and then the building owner will pay the service provider a reduced amount, a lower amount than the original utility bill, but higher than total savings, and so that the service provider gets a fee. It's complex, but I would say energy service agreements that can be passed on as a utility, basically, and as accounting standards proceed, maintain them as an operating expense, that will be valuable, very valuable. And that's what we're seeing is starting to finally catch interest. The issue is that they're expensive sometimes, so in smaller buildings, these groups have not really looked at. So there is a need to standardize in a way that the smaller buildings can be vetted more quickly to reduce transaction costs.
Okay, interesting. Okay. Why don't we go ahead and wrap it up right there? Gary, if you have any other questions, feel free to chime in. Make sure you unmute yourself.
Thanks. Real quick, Abigail, I got in a little bit late. What's your take, real quick, on deregulation versus the other area? Real quick.
Well, deregulation in terms of being able to have alternatives to the distribution of energy, I think it's great. In terms of just the impact on the overall competitiveness of the market. So I have a building owner in DC that right now, is looking at 7 of our properties that have not been, and they're all through PEPCO, and there's an ability for part of that bill to get long-term, different contracts, energy costs. On the gas side, as well, natural gas, there's a ability to go out to third parties and get more competitive rates. So from that's the standpoint I usually from the building owner standpoint, I think it's very valuable.
Okay. All right, everybody, we're going to wrap it up right there. We will be sending out Abigail's presentation, so you can have a look at that in detail. There's lots of information in there. So I want to thank Abigail Johnson, who is our presenter today. There she is. Abby, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lauren.
And also, Gary, always nice to see you. And we'll see you next time.